Welcome back, everybody. We love to do deep dives into these historical and religious figures, and today we're going to try and unpack, and I'm really excited about this one, the betrayal of Jesus.
Yeah.
We've got a whole bunch of teaching materials and study guides and stuff like that to kind of guide our conversation, and I'm really interested to see what we're going to find out today, because this is a story that's captivated people for centuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
The betrayal of Jesus, you know the players, Jesus, his disciples, Judas Iscariot, the famous betrayer.
Right.
But have you ever stopped to consider what would make somebody betray someone that they seemingly followed for years?
It's a question that's, inspired lots of debate and lots of different interpretations. Yeah. And one of the things that I think our sources really emphasize is the idea that this wasn't just like a spur-of-the-moment decision, right? There was this deliberate plot to arrest and kill Jesus, which I think really adds another layer to this whole story.
So we're not talking about just like a personal betrayal here. Like this was part of a larger, some people might even say preordained kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that brings up, these big questions about free will versus destiny, right? But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's focus on Judas for a minute.
Okay.
The sources we have suggest that his motives might have been more complex than we often assume.
Okay, so let's unpack that for a second. Because, I think the popular image of Judas is really just this image of greed, right?
Yeah.
He's motivated solely by the 30 pieces of silver, and that's it. But our sources hint that there might be something more going on.
Yeah, for sure. They suggest he might have had some political aspirations, right? Maybe he envisioned Jesus as this leader who would establish like a really powerful earthly kingdom.
Okay, so that's interesting. But then how do we square that with him also being like the treasure, right? Like you would think if that's the case, he would be more interested in, financial stability.
Right, that's a good point. And it really does highlight how complex this is, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he saw both, right? He saw that a successful revolution could bring him both political and financial gain.
Okay.
Or maybe, like some scholars have suggested he was caught between like these two different ideas of what a kingdom actually meant.
So Judas's understanding of kingdom might have been vastly different from what Jesus was actually preaching.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, it's like people even close to you can interpret things in ways that you just never would have expected, right?
For sure. And that brings us to another really fascinating detail in this story, which is the kiss, right? Like Judas identifies Jesus with a kiss. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but like a kiss is usually a gesture of, love and affection.
Right.
So what does it mean when it's used to betray?
Yeah, it's almost like this really stark contrast, right? Like you're highlighting the betrayal woven into this act. It's not just, hey, that's the guy.
Right, exactly. And our sources emphasize that it was more than just identification. It actually had like a deeper significance within the context of the Jewish legal system of the time.
Okay, so that's where I need a little clarification. Like, what do you mean by legal context? Like, was there some kind of formal process going on here?
Yeah, so in the Sanhedrin, which is like the Jewish court at the time, there was this specific role called the formal accuser, right? And this person was the one responsible for like initiating legal proceedings against someone. And what our sources suggest is that's exactly what Judas was doing with the kiss. He wasn't just pointing Jesus out. He was formally accusing him. Like he was setting the wheels of justice in motion.
So, that really adds a whole other chilling layer to this, doesn't it? It's like he was deliberately putting himself in the position of like judge and jury.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely suggests like a level of premeditation and a willingness to take on a very specific role in what was about to happen.
Wow. Okay, so while all of this is going down, we've got the other disciples. How are they reacting?
Right.
Specifically, Peter.
Right. So Peter, known for being a little impulsive, reacts in the very human way. He draws his sword, cuts off a soldier's ear. He's ready to fight back, defend Jesus.
Yeah, it's like that fight or flight, right? Fueled by loyalty and probably adrenaline.
For sure.
But then we have Jesus, who's completely different, right? Heals the soldier, seemingly accepting what's about to happen.
And not only does he heal the soldier, he even states, that he could summon legions of angels if he wanted to.
Wait a minute. He could have called in, like, the big guns?
Yeah.
And he didn't.
He didn't.
That kind of changes things. Why wouldn't he fight back if he had that kind of power at his disposal?
Right. And I think that question, really gets to the heart of Jesus' teachings and his purpose.
Yeah.
Right? It suggests that his path, even this agonizing betrayal, was part of this much larger plan, maybe even preordained. Remember we talked about free will versus destiny earlier.
Right, right. That totally brings us back to that. It's like he's choosing to submit to this predetermined course of events, even though he had the power to change it.
Exactly. And all of this is unfolding against this backdrop that I think adds another layer of symbolism and meaning to it, and that is the Passover meal.
Okay, yeah, I can see where you're going with this. I mean, Passover is commemorating the liberation of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. Like, what a loaded setting for this whole drama to unfold.
Right. And our sources really highlight that the Passover meal itself contains all this powerful symbolism related to Jesus's impending sacrifice.
So break that down a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, they emphasize the importance of the bread and wine at the Passover meal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And according to Christian tradition, these elements symbolize Jesus's body and blood offered as a sacrifice, for the sins of humanity.
So you have this ancient festival that is celebrating liberation from physical slavery. And then within that context, you have Jesus who's being presented as this different kind of liberator, right? Offering freedom from sin. It's like they're intentionally intertwined.
Exactly. And it's crucial, I think, to remember, John the Baptist's earlier proclamation of Jesus as the Lamb of God, right? Who takes away the sin of the world.
Right.
And our sources really stress the importance of understanding those symbols, especially in light of, what was about to happen.
It's like every detail, every symbol is pointing to the idea that the sacrifice was part of something bigger, something planned long ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to another really intriguing point that our sources raise, and that's the prophecy.
Oh, yes, the prophecy. So they explicitly connect the betrayal of Jesus with a passage from Psalm 41.9, which, talks about this close friend betraying the psalmist. It's pretty chilling.
Yeah, it is, yeah. And it raises, some really profound questions.
Yeah.
Like, if this betrayal was prophesied long ago, does that mean Judas had no choice in the matter?
Right.
Was he just playing out a role that was already determined for him?
I struggle with that, like this idea of foreknowledge negating free will. Like, if everything's already decided, then what does that say about our choices?
Right.
Our actions?
It's a huge question.
It is.
And, philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with this for centuries.
Yeah.
And it's one that we'll continue to explore, I think, as we go further in this story.
Okay, so before we get too far down the road here, I have to ask about this. Why do our sources bring up Benedict Arnold when we're talking about Judas? Like, what does American history have to do with the betrayal of Jesus?
Well, I think it's really interesting that they do that, right? Yeah. Because by comparing Judas to Benedict Arnold, this figure who's like infamous for his betrayal during the American Revolution, they're kind of prompting us to consider, the universal nature of betrayal.
So we're not just talking about like a biblical story anymore.
Right.
We're talking about like a human story.
Exactly.
One that plays out in all these different forms throughout history.
Exactly. And it raises some really interesting questions like, is all betrayal equal?
Right.
What are the lasting consequences of betrayal? How does the act of betrayal shape, individual legacies and historical narratives?
And how does it like impact our understanding of trust and loyalty, right? And the complexities of human relationships. I mean, we've opened up a can of worms here, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Talking about this one story, this betrayal of Jesus, it's so many questions about human nature and the choices that we make.
It is. And it's a story that, I think continues to resonate with us because it forces us to confront these really uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world that we live in.
And we are just scratching the surface. We're going to come back after a quick break to continue to unpack this.
It's interesting, think about how Benedict Arnold, like his name became synonymous with treachery, right? He's like branded the ultimate traitor. It makes you wonder, how has Judas been viewed throughout history? Like, has he always been the villain? Or have there been more nuanced interpretations of his actions?
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at these sources that suggest like his motives might have been way more complicated than just greed, right? So like, how has his legacy kind of evolved over time?
Well, in some interpretations, Judas is portrayed as this like purely evil figure. He embodies greed and deceit. But other perspectives offer a more complex view, I think.
Okay.
Like some theologians propose that Judas might have actually genuinely believed that he was acting in Jesus's best interest.
Wait, hold on. He thought he was helping Jesus by turning him over to the authorities? Like, how does that even make sense?
Well, you have to, I think, consider the historical context, right? At the time, there were all these expectations among the Jewish people for a Messiah who would, like, overthrow Roman rule and establish this powerful earthly kingdom.
Right.
And some scholars suggest that Judas might have believed that by forcing this confrontation with the authorities, he would, like, compel Jesus to finally reveal his divine power, you know?
Oh, okay. So it's almost like Judas is like this tragic figure, right?
Right.
Who misunderstood his role. Like he thought he was orchestrating this big moment that would lead to Jesus's, ultimate triumph. But instead, he set in motion the events that led to his death.
Exactly.
Right.
And it reminds us that even within, religious traditions, there can be these multiple interpretations of the same events and characters.
Right.
Each one offering, a different lens through which to view the story.
What stands out to you in all these different interpretations?
I think it's just this powerful reminder that we can never really truly know what's going on inside another person's mind.
Yeah.
Even those that we think we know really well.
Right.
Like their actions, even those that seem, clearly wrong or hurtful to us, might be coming from a place that we just don't fully understand.
Yeah. It's like you're challenging us to be a little more open-minded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to, consider the possibility that even in acts of betrayal, there may be layers of complexity, maybe misguided intentions, or even, in Judas's case, a distorted sense of loyalty.
Okay, so let's step back for a second here, because I'm wondering, like, why should our listeners even care about this story?
Right.
Like, this is a story that's centuries old, right? It's about betrayal, there's conflicting interpretations, and so on. Like, what makes it relevant to our lives today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, one of the things it does is it raises all these questions about my own, like, understanding of commitment and loyalty. Mm-hmm. Judas claimed to be a follower of Christ, and yet he ultimately betrayed him. I mean, does this story challenge the way you view the people in your life, their commitment, even your own commitment?
Totally.
Yeah.
I think about times when I've been betrayed, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's like in much smaller, less dramatic ways than what happened to Jesus.
Right.
Those moments when, like, someone you trust lets you down, or like your expectations of them don't align with their actions. Mm-hmm. Like, that's painful, and it really forces you to reevaluate, how you see that person in that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can challenge our own beliefs and values too, right?
Right.
Like, do we really understand what we're claiming to follow, and would we stand by those beliefs when things get tough?
Oh, man. I mean, that's a really tough question to answer, honestly, isn't it?
It is.
It's easy to say we would always do the right thing, but I think when you're faced with real-life situations, it's much harder to actually live up to your ideals.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this story really pushes us to, to confront those gray areas, those moments when our convictions are tested. Like, it's not just a historical anecdote, right? It's a reflection of the challenges that we all face in navigating relationships and commitments, and even ethical dilemmas.
And, I'm thinking about the Benedict Arnold comparison again, right?
Yeah.
It strikes me that, like, this story of Jesus's betrayal isn't just confined to, like, religious contexts, right?
Right.
It has implications for, like, how we view power and leadership and, like, group dynamics in all sorts of settings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You see this dynamic playing out in politics and business and, social movements, even families.
Right.
You have the charismatic leader, the loyal followers, and then you have the one who breaks ranks, the one who challenges the established order, whether intentionally or not.
Right. It's almost like a microcosm of, like, all human relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like we're constantly negotiating these roles, these dynamics of power and loyalty.
And the story of, Judas and Jesus really highlights the potential consequences of those dynamics, going awry.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even in, like, seemingly stable systems, there's always the potential for disruption.
Yeah.
For betrayal, for the unexpected.
So, the betrayal of Jesus, while it is this very specific historical event, also speaks to something really universal about, like, human nature, right? And the challenges that we face in navigating these really complex social structures.
And that universality is one of the reasons why, I think this story continues to fascinate us and trouble us, right? Mm-hmm. It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our relationships, and about the forces that shape history.
And I think maybe it also offers us an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
For some really deep self-reflection. Like if we can try to understand the complexities of Judas's motivations, the forces that led him to betrayal, maybe we can gain a better understanding of our own capacity for loyalty and for betrayal, for making good choices and bad choices.
It's a reminder that history isn't just this collection of, facts and dates.
Right.
It's a tapestry woven with human stories, full of complexities, contradictions, and lessons that continue to, resonate across the centuries.
And what lessons do you think, we can learn from this story?
Oh, man.
Big question.
That's a big one. I think one of the most important is the need for empathy, even when it's hard.
Go.
We may never fully understand Judas's motives, but by at least attempting to see the world through his eyes, to consider the pressures, the beliefs that might have influenced his actions, I think we can develop a more nuanced understanding of human behavior in general.
And maybe that empathy can also extend to ourselves, right?
Right.
I mean, we all make mistakes. We all have these moments of weakness. And by acknowledging, those shared human frailties, we can approach ourselves and others with a bit more compassion, maybe.
Yeah.
A bit more understanding.
And I think that's the most valuable takeaway from all of this, right? This deep dive, the betrayal of Jesus.
Yeah.
While it is this story of immense pain and loss, it can also be this catalyst for, greater empathy and self-awareness and just a deeper understanding of what it means to be human.
And as we continue to explore this story, I think it's important to keep in mind that the way we interpret history is often influenced by, our own cultural lens, our own understanding of the world.
Right.
And those interpretations, they can change over time as new evidence emerges, as our perspectives shift.
Which means there's always room for new insights, right?
Right.
New
Yeah.
perspectives on even the most ancient stories. I know for me, this deep dive has really challenged some of my own assumptions and, opened up all these new avenues of thought. How about you? Yeah, it's been a reminder that even stories that we think we know really well can still surprise us, can still challenge us, and can lead us to these, new understandings. And I think that process of discovery, of wrestling with, complex ideas and uncomfortable truths, that's what makes exploring history so rewarding.
Absolutely. We're going to come back after a quick break, and we're going to delve into some of the broader implications of this story and how it continues to, shape our understanding of the world today. It's crazy to think how this one story, the betrayal of Jesus, has become this, powerful archetype. And it really shapes how we view not only, relationships, but even, global events,
Yeah.
How have different cultures throughout history viewed the same story?
Yeah, that's a great point. The way we interpret historical events is always influenced by our own cultural lens, our own understanding of the world. Yeah. For example, during the Middle Ages, Judas was often depicted as this grotesque, almost demonic figure.
Oh, wow.
Which really reflected the prevailing views of evil and sin at the time.
So they weren't really interested in, the nuances of his motivations.
Right.
Or the human side of the story. He was just, evil.
Yeah, he was just a symbol of evil, like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
But in more recent times, we've seen, a shift towards these more psychological interpretations, right?
Oh, okay.
That explore the inner turmoil that Judas might have experienced. And some scholars even focus on his potential guilt and remorse.
Oh, wow.
And the factors that might have led him to take his own life.
It's like we're finally willing to see him as this complex human being, not just a villain in a play.
Right, exactly.
And it makes you wonder, what other historical figures might, benefit from a more nuanced and empathetic kind of re-examination.
For sure. I mean, history is full of people who have been, simplified, demonized, even romanticized to fit certain narratives.
Right.
And as we, I think, evolve as a society, so too should our understanding of the past.
Yeah.
We need to be willing to revisit those narratives, ask new questions, and just embrace the messiness, the complexity of human history.
And that's what I love about, doing this kind of deep dive, right? Because we're not just, rehashing old information. We're really engaging with these sources. We're questioning assumptions. We're considering different viewpoints. We're trying to peel back these layers of interpretation to get at least a more nuanced understanding of the events.
Yeah, for sure. So, in terms of key takeaways from all of this, what do you think our listeners should walk away with? What's the so what of all this?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is just that reminder that even those who seem most devoted can have, like, these hidden motivations, right? It's like
Yeah.
that whole saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Right.
But maybe it's more about understanding that, like, sometimes the lines between friend and enemy can be kind of blurry. What do you think?
I think so, too.
Yeah.
I think it is kind of a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust
Yeah.
and the importance of discernment. But I think it also goes beyond that. Like,
Yeah.
Judas's story, I think, highlights how important it is to try to understand different perspectives.
Yeah.
Like, he might have actually believed that he was acting in Jesus's best interest, even if that belief was totally misguided.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that there's often, like, more to the story than we might initially realize. Like,
Yeah.
we need to be willing to consider different viewpoints, even those that might seem, like, incomprehensible or even offensive at first.
For sure. And finally, I think this really challenges us to examine, like, our own commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Are we really living by the values that we say we are?
Right.
Are we willing to stand by them when things get rough?
Oh, that.
Or are our loyalties, more conditional, more convenient?
Those are tough questions. But I think those are the ones that really matter, aren't they? And that's what makes the story so relevant. It forces us to, like, really look inward, confront our own complexities and the choices that we make.
Yeah, I think so. The betrayal of Jesus isn't just, a historical event.
Right.
It's this mirror, I think, reflecting back at us, challenging us to be more aware, more discerning, and more committed to the values that, that really matter to us.
So, as you continue to kind of think about this story, I want you to ask yourself, like, what does loyalty really mean to you? How far are you willing to go for what you believe in? And keep those questions in mind as you navigate, the complexities of your own life, your own relationships. And who knows, maybe you'll discover some surprising insights along the way.
And remember, the beauty of all of this is that there's always more to discover, more to learn.
Yeah.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.